I'm Robert McCready at Evening Magic on X, formerly known as Twitter. Robert Garey is an artist, a painter, an engraver, an Anglican, a journeyman artist, a man about town, a reader, writer, and my friend on Facebook and in real life, Robert Garey. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Glad to be here.
This is our second interview. The first one was for the List magazine, maybe almost 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
And,
sounds right.
and you were having a show at the museum, maybe the Waters Building.
Yep. Yep.
And now you're having another show at Gately Gallery in Florence.
Correct. That's it. Yeah.
And how long is this show going to be going on?
It's up until October the 20th. It opened. Our opening reception was a week ago last Thursday. It was an amazing night. It actually opened to the public August the 29th, and it runs through October the 20th. We had that opening last Thursday. Now, coming up a week from this Saturday on the 23rd, there's going to be another event there for people who want to hear more about the paintings. We're going to have an event, a talk that I'm going to do Saturday morning, I think at 10:30, and then at 1:30 in the afternoon. That can be checked with the gallery's website, but I think those are the correct times. And I'm going to be walking through with whoever is interested that shows up and talking more in depth with the with the work that's exhibited. So that'll be a good for those who came to the opening, the reception. That was wonderful. That's not the greatest time to look at the artwork. That was like a party. But on the 23rd, I'm going to be talking more in depth about the paintings that are being exhibited there.
I like that you mentioned that it was a party
It
because it
was.
definitely felt like a party. There was a band, it was shoulder to shoulder, people were dressed up, and we had food, and people were laughing and talking, and it was very loud. Is that what you expected in your hometown?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, and that's what I was. That's what I was hoping for. Um, it was the idea of having an opening reception for the exhibit. I mean, that was neat. But what I really was hoping would happen would be like a real blast, like a party, and it was such. Yeah. So and it served as the opening of the exhibit, but more so than that, it was a party. It was so I mean I'm always up for a party, looking for the next one to come along, and it was cool that the basis for this one was my paintings there. That was my brother and nephew. It was their band. That was Randy and Wyatt Gary who were providing the music for us.
All right, just for the people that might be watching, where are you zooming us from right now?
Where what?
Where are you zooming us from right now?
From my studio here in Florence
And
on
Florence is
Lillian
where
Street. Yeah, my studio's in Florence these days.
you were born, right?
Now, I was born in Virginia, but my family moved here the summer after I was in the first grade. So I grew up here in Florence, went through school, almost finished high school. I went through 11 and a half years um, here at McClinigan, but class of 71 would be those classmates would be my graduating class at McClinigan.
And then you went to New York.
Well, I went to Charleston first. Went to Charleston in 70. I started going down because my brother Randy went down on the beach to Isle of Palms about 75, and I was going down there and sleeping on the sofa for a couple of years off and on. But in 77, I went down there and stayed. And so I was down in Charleston out on the Isle of Palms and Sullivan's Island for 9 years and went to New York in like 1986 and was up there for 26 years and came back to Florence in 2011 and been here since. So, yeah, so Florence is my hometown.
What was Charleston like back then?
Uh, it was it was on the way to being what it is now, but it was just starting. A lot of the historic district in Charleston was really ramshackle, all up and down East Bay Street, which are now all kind of restaurants and all kind of stuff, were empty warehouses. There was some neat waterfront bars still at Barnacle Gyms, like true kind of seaport bars were down on the on the riverfront. There was some rock and roll clubs in the warehouses. Captain Harris Blue Marlin Bar was in a warehouse that is now one of those fancy hotels down there. It was cool. It was um there were like on Church Street, there were you could back in those days you could have rented the second floor of one of those buildings down there, Church Street, for $25 a month. So there's some artists up there. It was different. It had Charleston is such a historical center, and you go there and you feel and you see and you feel the historic element of Charleston that was there back in the 70s and early 80s when I was there, but it looked the architecture was all there, but it was ramshackle and it looked more like the picture you get of of Charleston and Porgy and Bess, like Catfish Row. It still looked like that. It doesn't look like that anymore. It's like pristine now. It was pretty ramshackle back in those days. It was beautiful. Um, Out on the beach, out on the Isle of Palms and Sullivan's Island, there was cheap rent. Beach bum could live out there for almost nothing still. All that's gone. But it was wonderful back in those days. It was lovely. It's lovely today, but it's different, but it's still the essence of Charleston, the holy city, existed then as it does still today. But it's just so much cleaner. And I mean, tourists were down there in those days. That was still one of the big, and maybe the only thing going on down there. Um, the carriage rides and all that was there, and the market was there, but it was much less. It was much quieter. It was still kind of a sleepy southern city back in those days, rather than the bustling, really commercial enterprise that it is now.
So then you left Charleston when it was just fixing to turn and went up to New York in 1986, and it wasn't going to start turning until the 90s. What was New York like when you went in there? Maybe in comparison to Charleston, what was it like going there then in the 80s?
Yeah, well, where I was down in East Village, it was sketchy. It was a lot more. It was a lot more colorful than it is now. There were bombed out buildings. This is the Lower East Side that I'm talking about, which is where I live. Bombed out buildings that punk kids were, they were squatting in. There was a lot more. There was a lot more art going on in the island of Manhattan in those days. Um, like small galleries. It was still a place where young artists were creating and finding affordable, spaces, loft spaces. Um, it was uh, it was different. New York, Manhattan has become like Disney World North by now. It's not as interesting as it was back then. it was more dangerous back in those days. You could get bopped in the head walking, walking down the streets at night. Um, there were more like kind of dives to drinking than there are now. Though I don't know now. I think Charleston is disintegrating. Not Charleston, New York is looks very sketchy these days to me. I hadn't been up there in a few years. Really wouldn't want to be up there these days. It looks like it's in a mess. It was exciting. The 80s, when I got up there in the 80s and the early 90s, it was an exciting place to be. There was a lot going on up there.
What was the most dangerous encounter you ever had in New York?
Well, um, I lived in Brooklyn a couple different times. I was living over um, before Williamsburg, Brooklyn. A lot of the artists, a lot of people moved over there from Manhattan. And I moved over there. I was there for a year. Well, I moved around a couple places before I finally found a place to light in that I stayed, an apartment in East Village where I was for 20 years. And I lived in a couple different places, you know, looking for that final place to light, put my roots down. And I was in the south area of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, um, which is right over the East River from the Lower East Side, Williamsburg Bridge. And pretty much, I was probably the only white guy on the block. It was all Puerto Ricans. And I knew a lot of my neighbors, and there was a bodega across the street where I'd go over there and drink Budweiser and eat blood sausage with them, hang out with Jamie Rodriguez and those guys. But at this point, I'd been in New York about 3 years, and I felt like I kind of had the city wired. But I discovered one night that my antennas really weren't out and attuned yet because I'd been with one of my buddies and we'd been bar hopping in Manhattan. We'd been up to Tin Pan Alley and we would drank all the way from like 42nd Street all the way back downtown. And I was coming back into my neighborhood there in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. And I got off the subway train and I'm lit up pretty good. We've been drinking for hours. And I'm walking back to my apartment. And I yet hadn't learned that you walk on the side of the street where the street lights are, you stay in the light. And but my apartment was on the other side of the street. And about a block from my apartment door, I was walking along, there's a little park right there. And I'm walking in, I'm walking in the shadows, street lights across the street, and I walk past this little building. It's a little, what do you call it? A little infrastructure building for the park. And I walked by, and right when I got past it, this is deep shadow. All of a sudden, somebody grabbed me from behind and picked me up, and my feet are off the ground. And I can't see who it is. All I know is that somebody's got me, and they pulled me into the shadows there. And at first, I started laughing because it felt kind of funny to be grabbed and picked up in the air like this. But as they were pulling me into the shadow, I said, "Ooh, this is not good. Um, this ain't good." And so I'm sitting there, I'm up, got my feet up in the air, and the guys, some big guys got me, and I can see off the periphery of my vision that there's like these people here. And one of them comes around in front of me, yeah, a kid, is a Hispanic kid, Puerto Rican kids from the neighborhood. And starts talking to me, and they're going through my pockets and whatnot. And at this point, I figure, I best get loose. I better get loose from this man. I'm not sure what's getting ready to happen. And so I had heavy motorcycle boots on and I stomped the guy's foot, his instep, and he let me go. And as soon as he let me go, somebody came down for a rash, hit me in the side of the head, broke my glasses, blooded me all up, knocked me down. And so I'm looking around, there's a bunch of these kids, man, they're kicking at me and whatnot, and I'm rolling around trying to get back up on my feet, and I did, and got punched a couple of times and punched a couple of them a couple of times. They headed all down, going down the street. Don't have my glasses. They're busted up and gone. And the weirdest thing was that I got about halfway down the block, and this kid came up around in front of me, and he took his camera and took my portrait with my blooded up face. Um, I figured it was like a trophy shot. Well, I got home and looked in the mirror, and I'm all bloodied up, and washed the blood off. And the next day, I went and got up with some friends, and they patched me up, and we went and got some more eyeglasses from the 1 hour eyeglass place, and I went on to work. And when I got back from work, my buddies across the street, they were Puerto Rican too, but they were like my age, and they says, "Man, what happened to you?" Because I got a big old black eye and the side of my face full of. I says, "Well, these kids, they jumped me last night, man." I said, "I was down there, down by the park, and they grabbed me when I came home." And Jamie Rodriguez, he was my buddy. He says, "Oh, I know who they are. They live over on that other block. Those are some bad kids." He says, "I'll tell you what we're going to do." He says, "This is not good." He says, "We're going to take care of this." He says, "When you come home from work tomorrow, I'm going to have that kid, and I'm going to bring him to you, and I'm gonna give you this baseball bat." They had a baseball bat there in the bodega. He said, "I'm gonna give you this baseball bat, and I'm gonna put him in your apartment. I'm gonna stand outside the door, and you take care of him." And I said, "No, Jamie, no, man, I don't want to do that. I don't want to see those guys again." He says, "Oh no, man, you can take care of this. I'm taking care of you here." He says, "You're in the neighborhood, bro. You and me, we drink Budweiser together." I says, "This has got to start." I says, "No, don't put that man in my house. I don't want to see him." Well, he says, "All right. Well, if that's the way you want it." He says, "I was trying to help you out." I said, "Well, I thank you, but no, don't put that guy in my house with me." So that was that was the one and only time I got into any kind of like trouble or altercation. But you see, I learned something. If I had known, I should have been on the other side of the street, walking under the street light, and I'd have seen those kids over across the street. They wouldn't, and I'd have had eye contact with them, and they would have let me be. But I walked past them in the shadow where they could reach out from behind me and grab me. So my antennas got a little more tuned to the city that night. So I figured it was a worthwhile experience. I learned something.
Well, that is very interesting. That's an interesting story, and you can kind of, you know, I was too young to know New York back then, but I've certainly seen movies that took place in New York back then. And one of them that comes to mind is the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. Um, Willie Lopez, who I think lived in Prospect Place, he was Puerto Rican, and and so you kind of got the feel. So I can kind of see what was going on with you there. That's an interesting story. Um, Moving on a little bit from your lifestyle in New York to the art. I know a little bit about it. And actually, the first time I heard about your art journey, I heard it from someone else. I didn't even know who you were. This guy said, Bobby Gary came to town. He's painting all these pictures and he went to the art school, but they didn't give him a degree. But he took all the same classes. I don't remember who told me that, but that's the first time I ever heard
Uh,
of you. I never even seen you before. I heard,
uh-huh,
I heard the myth before I saw you. So
uh-huh.
just so that we can have it on record forever, tell us that story.
Yeah, about the academy.
Yeah, the academy.
Yeah, that's the New York Academy of Art. It's a fantastic school. Um, it's huge now. Um, but when I went there, it was pretty small. Matter of fact, the first year is a 2 year MFA program that I entered and went through. Um, there was 25 students per each graduating class, broken into Section A and Section B. So you went through that program with 12 other students, 12 other artists. Um, the school was interesting. What it was a project that started by Andy Warhol and several of his friends, um, who Andy Warhol later on in his career, he had started up some large scale religious paintings, and he discovered that is wonderful and artist, accomplished and well known, successful artist as he was, he said about these large um, religious paintings, and he pretty quickly came to the realization that he did not have the skills to be able to, he had not acquired through his career, he had not acquired the skills necessary to produce that type of work. I mean, he was looking back to the Renaissance, the big grand paintings in Florence and Rome, and he was aware that he wasn't able to do it. Um, Now, he could have put the compositions together and used modern tools and cameras, but he was not able to do what he thought he wanted to set out to do. So he and another friend, Stuart Peabar, was another one. They started the academy, and it began first in the basement of a church. And the idea was to provide art students with the skills, the traditional skills necessary, like anatomy and life drawings, to be able to produce works, believable, naturalistic works um, depicting the human figure, which is something that had not been for quite a while, was no longer being taught in the art schools. It was all, with the abstract expressionists still held sway internationally as well as in New York. Well, Andy Warhol and his buddies, they set up a program that was based, they researched and set up a program of study based upon the the Carracci family, the 16th century Roman um, family, the Carracci. They were mural painters, and they had a program that they put their apprentices through to teach them, to bring them up to where they could work on these large scale mural commissions that they were doing. And this was the basis of the instruction. Now, but that was several years before I came along. But when I got into the academy, this was the course of study prescribed. You went through this 2-year program. There was no elective. You went through it step by step. It was like an additive thing. You started off drawing from the cast and life drawing, anatomical studies. Um, we had access to the cadavers at Hunter University. We were doing dissection, like a classical education. Fantastic. Now, the way I came upon that was I'd been working in New York as a freelance mural painter. I was working for several different mural studios in the city as a mural painter, and I had a special knack and self-acquired information applying perspective to artistic composition, which a lot of other artists did not necessarily have access to, weren't interested in learning because it's kind of mathematical geometry um, um, perspective. And I was working, laying out for these large mural projects that was being done in the studios. I was laying them out, taking the designs and laying them out in a perspectival plan to make them look like realistic. So I was working as a professional artist. Now, when you're in New York, I was freelancing. In New York, when you finish, if you're a freelancer, when you finish one job, one project, you had better have something lined up. Things move so fast and money goes through your pockets so fast that you need to have things lined up ahead, have connections where you can keep working, else you're going to get caught up short. So um, one day, this is when I was living in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. I was reading, I got the Yellow Pages, and I went to murals in the Yellow Page section. I was looking through, and I was jotting down the address and the telephone numbers of all the mural studios in the city that I was going to go by and drop off a portfolio, drop off a business card, and talk to them. Well, I turned to one of these, and in the Yellow Pages there was a quarter-page ad that said New York Academy of Art Mural Atelier. I said, "Oh, an atelier. That sounds kind of Renaissance-y. What is this?" And they had some like very classical, Greek classical figures illustrating it. It says the mural atelier. I jotted that down. It's on Lafayette Street. And the next day, I went down there. I got on the train and I went down Lafayette Street, and it was in a building there. And I went in, took the elevator up, and there was a young lady sitting at a desk. I guess she was a student doing work study stuff. She was like working as a receptionist. And told her, I said, "Listen, I'm a mural painter, and what's this? Does your atelier need any mural painters? Because it says, this, I got your number out of the Yellow Page." She says, "Oh, well, we don't have the mural atelier anymore because we did have a program, but to teach it for the students to be doing it, there was no way we could compete with the commercial, mural studios in the city, so we've disbanded it." But I says, "Well, I'm looking around in this room, and there's these classical plaster casts, these drawings, academic drawings, academy drawings of the figure all around the wall." And I'm looking around, and I said, "Well, what is this place?" He says, "Well, this is the New York Academy." I said, "Huh? Well, what do y'all do?" She says, "Well, we're a graduate school." I said, "You are?" I says, "Huh?" And she says, "Here," she handed me a catalog. It says, "Well, take a look at this." Wanting to get rid of me, I reckon. Because and I said, open it up, and I'm looking at the table of contents of the courses that are, being taught here in this building where I found myself: perspective, anatomy, philosophy, geometry, methods and materials of the grand masters, secrets of the old masters, painting techniques of the old masters, life sculpturing. I said, "Oh, I've been studying this stuff on my own for years." I says, "I want to take these courses." And the young lady says, "Well, that's good. Where'd you do your undergraduate?" And I says, "What's that?" She says, "Where'd you go to college?" I says, "I didn't." She says, "Well, this is a graduate school. You have to have an undergraduate degree to apply here. This is for the MFA." And I said, "Oh, well, that's cool, but I want to take these courses." And she says, "Well, you have to have an undergraduate." And I says, "Well, I don't care about that. I've been working on this stuff myself for years. I want to take these courses. How can I come in here and take these?" And at this point, she gets on the phone and she calls an assistant dean to come get me out of her hair, come up. And he came up and introduced himself and says, "How may I help you?" I said, "I want to take these courses, this anatomy, this. I says, "This is what I've been working on my own. I want to enter the school." He says, "Well, where did you do your undergraduate?" And I says, "I didn't." He says, "Well," took me back to his office. He says, "Have a seat." He says, "Now, why do you want to take the, who are you and what is your interest here?" And I told him, I says, "I'm a professional, I'm a mural painter, I'm a professional artist. I'm working as a muralist in the city. All these courses that y'all have, I have been on my own studying this stuff. I've been ordering the treatises from the Renaissance, Alberti, Filippo Brunelleschi, the Da Vinci sketchbooks. I've been working on this stuff for years, and I've made some progress." He says, "Well, do you do figurative work?" And I says, "I do." He says, "Do you have a portfolio of life drawings?" I said, "I do," which I did because I had spent some time up at the Art Students League and I had a good portfolio of figurative work that I'd been doing. And he made an appointment for me for the next week to come back and bring him this portfolio. And I did. And he looked at it and he said, okay. Well, this is it's a graduate school. This is for the MFA, but we are able to make special provisions for serious artists to come in and go through the course with us. And I says, good. When can I start? He says, you can matriculate in the spring semester. I says, good. He said, now, as far as financing this, and I says, yeah, that's probably a very good question. He says, well, we're gonna bring you into the program, give you 50% um, of scholarship, and the next 50% we're going to work out for you as a work study situation so that you can come into the school. And I did. And what I did, I went through the 2 years full time. That was in the fall that this conversation occurred. And what I did, I went around to the studios that I was working for and I lined up work for Christmas, lined up as much work as I could get and talked to them about keeping me in touch for the summer, worked out enough money, saved every saved up the money I was making from the project, started school in that February, went straight through full time those 2 years, um, working in the summer and Christmas as a muralist for these studios I worked for. The summer in between the 2 years, I went to Italy, went to Rome and Florence to study in person the works um, that we were studying from. Then it came time to did my what graduation project, big project. Went to the faculty, critique, did all that. Even put on the cap and gown and walked with all my classmates, and they gave me my piece of paper. But rather than it saying Robert Garey has been awarded the MFA in studio painting, what it said was Robert Garey has been certified as having completed the work that would have been an MFA. So I got like a GED for graduate school. I skipped college, went to graduate school, got a GED. I got the GED for high school too. So that was what that was all about.
That's
It was
really
fantastic. It was unbelievable. And that school today is big. They've got a big building down in Tribeca, and the curricula has broadened way out. When I went through, it was you went through the first year, you took everything they had. It was like a additive type thing, and then you declared where you're going to major in sculpting or painting, all figurative. Nowadays, they've got like printmaking and photography, and it's huge. There's hundreds of students there now. It's an amazing school. But the history of it that I always thought really fascinating that this was something that Andy Warhol started as one of the last things he did in his career as a result of his coming to the realization that he did not have those traditional skills and thought that young art students should be provided with that information and training.
and that is really interesting to know that Andy Warhol was having some religious experiences and was painting some religious figures because all we know is the Marilyn from
Yeah,
Andy
yeah,
Warhol.
yeah,
Um, and that's it's a really interesting story about just going out there and doing things and not asking for permission. So many people nowadays they want to ask permission, they want to know what the experts are saying. They're not using their own brain and their own reason. And your story is kind of inspirational just about going out there and doing your own thing and making it happen and following your passion and doing what you love, especially be able to be a professional artist your whole life and not having to you know be a bartender work at the DMV like I do, so you can just do your own thing.
Yeah.
My question um, about your art, you have some very realistic, serious portraits. You have um, scenes where something salacious is about to happen, and even scenes where something violent is about to happen. How would you characterize your body of work?
Uh, as well, the human figure is the basis for it. Always the human figure, and the human individual within the context of a story, a narrative, something like a place, of a human being in a place and time with something going on that is affecting them. So it all comes down to the human figure, and then always scenes or images or thoughts. It's always something that I'm personally engaged in or interested in, someone who I know, a story I've been involved in. The title of the exhibit is The Life and Times. So there, all the paintings, there's a every story in there has every painting in there has a story. There's a narrative content. Below, you can look at any of those paintings, and there's like the topical surface. Here's some people in a park. Here's some people on a street. Here's somebody holding some apples or some tomatoes, and you can look at it just as simply as that. But with me, what's down, you can the story is like peeling the layers of an onion, going deeper, deeper, is always set upon a specific thought or theory or philosophy that I have, or someone I know, and their relationship to me and the place and time. So that show, in a large sense, is like an autobiographical narrative of my life and times. Um, there, there, there's um, there's a number of paintings that illustrate a moment in the verses of these Appalachian ballads that I love, that I perform and I sing, and I took like 10 years of time painting images, making paintings based upon the stories, the narrative in the Appalachian ballads. And that comes from, it's like my love of that music and my love of narrative painting, which goes back to the artwork that has influenced me most deeply would have been the narrative paintings of the great masters of the Renaissance, the biblical stories, the Greek and Roman myths, those large narrative depictions of the tales from the Bible or the tales from the Greek and Roman myths, and that's kind of what I'm doing, but in my own place and time. Um, like rather than going back and trying to like redo the Greek and Roman myths, it's like it's like that kind of thinking, but my own personal narrative, or that one series that about 20 works that I spent 10 years on that are depicting moments in the songs of these ballads. And that was interesting because I had had this notion, this thought, it was false. And I finally discovered that I was holding a false and negative um, idea in my mind because I play music and I paint. And there was a long time where I saw the two in conflict. Like, okay, sometimes I put my creative energy into my music, but then sometimes I put my creative energy into my art. And when I'm making my art, the music's in the way or it's distracting me. Or when I'm playing music, um, the, the art is pulling me. I felt like a push and pull, and that the two were in conflict. Well, all of a sudden it dawned on me. I said, no, 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 that's a false notion. It's all coming from the same creative source. These two are the same. It's just like different media. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take and make paintings of the songs I like to sing. And that spawned a 10-year project that produced about 20 words. Um, and I took and put the two together and produced a major body of work. Um, that was and then that ties my music and my painting and my primary influence of those narrative paintings. Um, what I set out to do was it's like the stories were going to happen. I mean, I was gonna live my life. I was pretty much determined that I was going to live it on my own, um, by my own lights, you know, and I was going to do what I was going to do, and there was going to be stories produced. What I set out to do, my early, well, I was drawing and painting from grammar school. I never did anything else. I always did. But what I set out when I started working towards the idea of a career or serious artworks, it wasn't to have something to say. It wasn't to join some art movement or to participate in an artist's community or to be a part of anything. It was precisely and specifically and doggedly to learn how to paint the craft, the traditional craft of painting, um, so that I could paint whatever it is I wanted to paint, being whatever it was that interested me. So um, I'm not a modern artist, other than the fact that I don't think you can be an artist living in a contemporary age and not being a part of your age. So I mean, I will accede to the point. I mean, I'm a modern artist in that I live in the modern time, but as far as like movements of modern art, I, I've never really been interested in them. I've just been interested in big, grand, well crafted, beautiful paintings depicting the human figure in whatever aspect at the moment I'm interested in portraying. So I set out to be a painter rather than wanting to be an artist. I mean, already when I was in the third grade, some kids, oh, I'll be a fireman, I'll be a policeman, I'll be an astronaut. Asked me, I said, well, I already am. It's like, I am who I am. I'm an artist. Now all I got to do is learn how to paint.
That's really interesting, and I think you covered a lot of other questions that I had, like where's your inspiration come from and things like that. But I'm curious, what do other people say about your paintings? How do they characterize them?
A lot of people, I hear this a lot. A lot, I and have always heard, even before I knew what WPA was, people have always equated me to the WPA. The works, the 1930s works project that what Franklin Delano Roosevelt started up to provide work for the artists um, during the Depression, when they painted all the Capitol domes and the post offices and the libraries. Um, I've been people. That's the one school that people have always equated me. They'll say, "Oh, the WPA." I one time was um, contract commissioned with the Evergreen Mural Studio up in New York City. They had a contract with the Long Island Railroad. There was the Long Island Railroad's section of Pennsylvania Station was being renovated, and they were putting up pedestrian barricades from the walkway where their clients were, the train passengers were to where the construction was. Um, it was it went finally when it was completed would have followed around three sides of a football field, went anywhere from 8 to 12 feet tall. And what the Long Island Railroad wanted produced a mural was depictions of the Long Island Railroad and historic trains, and they wanted it to be produced in the WPA style. Evergreen Studio called me up and said, "Hey, we got a mural we want you to head up." They want it to be the WPA. Well, so I produced this mural with a crew of about 12 other artists, with me directing it, designing it, doing all the figures while they were doing the background. And I didn't I didn't say, okay, let's do the WPA. I just did my thing. And it fit the what the requirement to be something that would emulate those WPA works. And I don't discount that. I understand what that is. The WPA is figurative work, is realistic work, representational, and it's like the workers and the farmers and people, the story of people, and it's being painted by um, American artists, figurative artists in the middle part of the country. And I understand what it is that why people are equating me to that work, because I'm an American figurative artist and I'm looking back to the Renaissance. Those works were being produced by American artists who were looking back to the same traditions as I looked back to. So there was a natural, whenever people have told me that, I says, yeah, I can, you're right. It's not that I've looked at Thomas Hart Benton and Paul Cadmus and Reginald Marsh, the Ascan School, George Bellows, those early um, mid 20th century American artists who were obscured by the abstract expressionists that held sway through the middle part and up into almost the next turn of the century. Those artists, that work, um, um, Rock, um, um, Rockwell, Norman Rockwell, those painters, kind of doing the same things that I do. So when it's like when I had my faculty critique at the academy, I had to defend my painting. It's a big painting. It's like 8 feet, like 10 by 8 feet. It was huge of of a scene. And it was done from a dream I had, the dream of the fat man dancing in the, you know, it's like you looked to the door and there was some cooling towers, nuclear cooling towers, like the dream of the three fat men dancing in the end times with all these. And I had to defend that against the faculty because they says, "Oh, this looks like the WPA. This doesn't look like classical 16th century Rome. You've gone and done a work that looks like WPA." Well, I didn't go sit out to be the WPA. I just painted what I painted. So it's funny that that's always been the case, and I still hear it to this day. Um, but as I explained, I understand what it's all about. There, um, the um, the faculty at the academy were the works they were wanting to look at works. Uh, there was people there was like Renaissance art Nazis. They wanted it to look like 15th, 16th century Rome. Um, well, that's not what I was about. Of course, I'm looking back, using the same skills. It's a lot of the same stuff, but putting it in my own, you know, coloring it the way I feel it.
So, Bobby Gary, this comes to the end of the interview. And at the end of the interview, Paul Leslie, who does the Paul Leslie Hour, he recommends turning over the interview to the guest, giving the guest the microphone so the guest can have control of the show, so the guest can say whatever he wants to say for all the world to hear. And we're at that time
Uh-huh.
now. The show is yours.
Uh-huh. All right. And do I get to hear that?
No, this is you. You get to say whatever you want to say to everyone listening.
Well, right now?
Yes, no more questions. It's all you.
Oh, okay. Well, I know what I'll say. Um, this is what I got to say about all this is I'm a blessed man. I was the good Lord blessed me with a gift that and a passion that I've had my entire life that I have been able to enjoy, support myself with, to communicate my thoughts with other. I mean, like a gift that I'm able to share with other people. Um, just like I'm a blessed man, and the blessing comes from the good Lord above. He has provided me with the wherewithal to have led a very interesting life, a very satisfying. Um, it has been all kind of things along the way, but the basis of it has been um, foundation has been. I used to say when I was younger, before I really had a handle on it, I would talk about saying that my art would be my saving grace. And that's true, has been. Everything I've been through and go through and participate in, both good and bad, and plenty of both. But more recently, I came to understand that that saving grace that I have understood has been like an anchor for me. It hasn't been me and my talent, it's been that which the good Lord has blessed me with. That's what I have to say about it all.
Thank you, Robert Gary.
You're welcome, Robert. I enjoyed it.